Welcome back to Peculiar Paths to Peace, where some find it kooky, others find relief. I'm Adam Freilich, and this is episode 2, entitled Psychological Acupressure. I don't know why, but I feel like a ninja when I say that. Psychological acupressure. Or maybe a CIA agent. In this episode, we're going to explore a technique called tapping. What is it? What's the science behind it? And how do you even do it? And additional resources will be found in the show notes if you find this interesting. Disclaimer, the content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions, advice, or guidance. Okay, tapping is another name for EFT, Emotional Freedom Techniques. It's also sometimes referred to as psychological acupressure. I'm just going to call it tapping throughout the rest of this episode to make it easier, but I do want to point out that the term psychological acupressure is a wonderful and accurate description of this technique. If you would like to look up more information online, then I recommend using the search term EFT or tapping meditation, and it'll get you the information you're looking for. Now, tapping combines two principles, the principles behind Chinese acupressure and the principles behind modern psychology. Let me go ahead and interject right here to say that this is a therapy that you are able to do to yourself. So anyone can do it. You don't need someone else to do this to you, like you might think of with the term of acupressure, going somewhere and somebody doing something to you. If you look up tapping, you will find it can be used for a lot of different issues. So here's a few, and it's going to be a long list. Stress, anxiety, phobias, emotional disorders, chronic pain, addiction, weight control, limiting beliefs, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and insomnia. Seems like it could be used for just about anything. But remember, I'm not a physician or part of your healthcare team, so make sure you seek medical or mental help if you need it. In episode 1, I discussed how I was going to divide coping techniques into two different categories, daily management and crisis management. Well, tapping actually falls into both categories, so you can incorporate this into a daily or almost daily practice, or this can just be reserved for those freak-out, high-anxiety moments. Acupressure and acupuncture both deal with something called meridian points, so touching specific points on your body. There is scientific evidence that applying gentle but firm pressure to these meridian points, also called acupoints, will actually stimulate the brain, causing it to release endorphins, suppress pain signals, release muscle tension, and cause you to feel happy, joyful, and safe. So where did tapping come from? The history of tapping is that Dr. Callahan, a psychologist, had been working with a patient's phobia and kind of as a last resort just had the patient repeatedly tap on these different acupressure points. To his and the patient's amazement, there was notable relief. Dr. Callahan began investigating this and developed a technique that he called thought-field therapy. About 10 years later, an engineer named Gary Craig, who was working with Dr. Callahan, slowly began improving the technique. He was trying to create a simpler tapping sequence, and this is actually what we're discussing today. Let's look at 4 different research studies real quick. There are a lot more studies, but I chose these 4 to highlight because they really piqued my interest. Even though we are talking about research, I promise that this will be interesting, hopefully not boring, and then we'll get into exactly how to do a tapping therapy session. Research article number 1 is in 2013. There was a research project of using tapping therapy on war veterans who had PTSD. The group of veterans were divided into 2 groups. One group received tapping therapy and the other group did not. At the end of the study, which lasted about a month, the tapping group reported significant reductions in their psychological distress and PTSD symptoms. More specifically, 90% of that tapping group no longer met the PTSD clinical diagnosis criteria, compared to just 4% of the non-tapping group. The most amazing thing for me from this research is that at 6 months later, the group came back and 80% still no longer met the PTSD clinical diagnostic criteria. Research article number 2, it occurred in 2017. There's a research study regarding anxiety and depression in relationship to food cravings and obesity. The subjects were divided into 2 groups. One received 8 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's just talk therapy. It's what you generally think of when you're thinking of going to a counselor or a therapist. And the other group received 8 weeks of tapping. The results revealed that tapping was extremely comparable to the cognitive behavioral therapy group, even when those groups were compared, get this, 6 months later and 12 months later. That shocks me. And research article number 3 also occurred in 2013. There's a research project related to tension headache sufferers. I have tons of headaches, so this one really piqued my interest. It specifically measured the perceived stress level, quality of life, cortisol levels, and frequency and intensity of headaches. One group of participants did tapping twice a day for 2 months. The cortisol levels had no change in this research study, but there were significant reductions in stress levels and the frequency and intensity of headaches. And the last research article, so far, hopefully this hasn't been bad for you. This one is a little bit lengthier though, so just stick with me. This 4th research article actually occurred last year in 2019. It's a new research project that looked into multiple physiological markers of health. And what that means is it tested a lot of things related towards tapping that occurred inside of the body. They looked at the following: heart rate variability, heart coherence, resting heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol levels, and immunoglobulin A, which is a part of the body's immune system. They also secondarily looked at non-physiological markers like anxiety, depression, PTSD, pain, and cravings. And these results are very promising. So let's look at these non-physiological marking results first. Anxiety symptoms decreased by 40%, and depression symptoms were very similar. They decreased by 35%. And PTSD symptoms were similar to that of 32%. Pain symptoms decreased by 57%, and cravings decreased by 74%. So now let's look at actually the physiological findings. The body's immune system, so immunoglobulin A, increased by 113%. The resting heart rate decreased by 8%, so that's good. The cortisol levels decreased by 37%. And listen up if you have blood pressure issues. The systolic blood pressure, so that's the top number in the blood pressure, decreased by 6%, while the bottom number, diastolic blood pressure, decreased by 8%. All right, after all that science talk, it's finally over. Thanks for hanging in there with me for this research. I thought that you might like to know a little bit of science behind the technique. Hopefully, maybe it convinced you a little bit. All right, let's jump into how to actually do the tapping therapy. But first, this episode is brought to you by... Just joking. Still no sponsors. Not exactly sure why, but I do need to check the mailbox today, so I'll see if something got sent. Now, back to how to get to tapping. Do note that there are tiny variations with tapping depending on who you talk to, just like with everything else in life. But I've decided to stick with Nick Ortner's book called The Tapping Solution, a revolutionary system for stress-free living. I'll have a link in the show notes to where you can buy the book. Again, that is Nick Ortner's book called The Tapping Solution, a revolutionary system for stress-free living. And no, I'm not getting any proceeds from the book. I just kind of liked the book. I like the way he explained some things. To me, there is some fluff in there, but there's some good content as well. He also has an app that I highly recommend, and it is called Tapping Solution. Tapping Solution. It is free to download, and there's quite a few free tapping sessions. You can upgrade and get access to a lot more sessions, but there are plenty of free sessions to get you started, and that you can just stick with too. You don't even have to upgrade. So totally download the app if you're interested, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Now, before we get started, you do need to know that you're going to be looking freaking ridiculous when you do this technique. But secretly, I think that's one of the reasons why I really love it. So again, you're going to look crazy. So just get that out of the way. So let's go into the 8 tapping points. And all you do is you literally tap those 8 points 5 to 7 times. You can do it shorter, you can do it longer, whatever feels right to you. You can either tap on one side of the body or you can do both sides at the same time. That's what I like to do because, I mean, if you're going to look crazy, you might as well commit to it, right? Well, anyway, while you're tapping on these points, you're going to be saying or repeating phrases out loud, or you can just listen to those phrases while you tap it out. And that's what we're going to do today. You're going to be tapping while I'm talking it out for you. So make sure that you're comfortable, because we're going to find these 8 tapping points together, okay? Tapping point number 1, we're going to call it the eyebrow. So begin tapping around the eyebrow, and that's going to be the beginning of the eyebrow where it meets the nose. So kind of where you might have a unibrow that starts growing. The second tapping point is the side of the eye. So it's basically the other end of the eyebrow. This isn't your temple, but it is close. Stay closer to the bone, though, that's around the eye. The third tapping point is underneath the eye. Still try to stay there on the bone. You can also go a little bit into the sinus cavity. Number 4 is under the nose. So close to that upper lip. Number 5, we're going to call the chin, but it's actually below the bottom lip, so not quite to your chin. Number 6 is your collarbone. Number 7 is under the arm, so basically where a bra strap would be, or a couple of inches underneath the arm. And the last tapping point is directly on top of your head. Told you, you're going to look totally crazy, but you're actually going to feel great after this. Let's go over that one more time so that we can see exactly where those are. Eyebrow is the beginning of the eyebrow where it meets the nose. Again, aka unibrow is starting. Number 2 is side of the eye. So basically the other end of the eyebrow. This isn't the temple though. Number 3 is under the eye. Number 4 is under the nose. Number 5, we're calling it the chin, but it's below the bottom lip, not quite to the chin. Number 6 is the collarbone. Number 7 is under the arm, basically where a bra strap would be, maybe a couple of inches underneath the arm. And number 8 is top of the head. Now, as long as you're close to these points, you're still going to get results. You're still activating those meridian points or those acupoints. So you don't have to actually be too concerned with getting it just right, although I will have a link in the show notes below for you to reference so you can actually see somebody doing this as well. Now, let's begin our tapping session. We're going to tap about anxiety. So stop for a moment and think about your current anxiety level. Let's rate the intensity of our anxiety, choosing a number on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most intense. When we finish our tapping, we're going to rate our anxiety level again to see if this tapping session helped. Tap along as I direct you. Tapping on the eyebrow, I can't calm down. Side of the eye, all these feelings of being overwhelmed. Under the eye, I'm feeling so much stress. Under the nose, why does this always happen? Chin, I'm overwhelmed. Collarbone, my anxiety is so high. Under the arm, it won't go away. Top of the head, I can't keep going on like this. Back to the eyebrow, my anxiety is high. Side of the eye, I can't get calm. Under the eye, I have too much to do. Under the nose, and so much anxiety. Chin, I'm overwhelmed. Collarbone, there's nervous energy inside of me. Under the arm, all these feelings of being overwhelmed. Top of the head, all these feelings of being overwhelmed. Back to the eyebrow, I choose to relax. Side of the eye, I choose to accept myself. Under the eye, I've done it before, and I can do it again. Under the nose, I choose to release this feeling of being overwhelmed. Chin, I have the power to control this. Collarbone, I have the power to be calm. Under the arm, releasing these feelings of being overwhelmed. Top of the head, letting them all go. Now take a deep breath. Hold your breath and release your breath. Now, let's rate our issue again, our anxiety level. On a 0 to 10, previously you chose a number. What would that number be now? Hopefully, it's decreased. If it isn't exactly where you want it to be, just tap it out a few more rounds. We'll go ahead and end the podcast now, hopefully on a good, positive, and relaxing note. Remember, I've posted some tapping resources in the show notes, and you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Peculiar Paths to Peace. That's PECULIAR Paths to Peace. Until next time, be peculiar and love yourself.